Salt Lake City Council for July 9th, 2019. The first item on our agenda is not going to be the first item that we take up today. The first item that we take up will be an ordinance regarding zoning text amendment for restaurants with drive-through windows in the TSA MUECT zoning district. So Nick Tarbett is going to introduce and lay this issue out for us. Doug Danzy, who's the CAN senior planner, is here as well. And once we work through this issue, I just want to point out that we did have, our first item was a written briefing. Just encourage all of you to look at that, and if you have questions or any comments that needed to be made about that, just let me know. If not, after the zoning text amendment, we'll go back to number 2 and then jump to number 4. Clear as mud? Okay. Nick, it's all you.
So that I don't risk making Doug repeat the introduction, I'll just let him take it from here. But we do have the applicant, Lori Hendricks, and they have a presentation ready after Doug's presentation when the council's ready for that.
Okay. And the applicant understands that they have 5 minutes? Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so this petition is to allow drive-throughs in a very specific portion of the TSA zones. TSA is transit station area, so this doesn't apply to all TSA zones. It only applies to the mixed-use economic center transitional area. So just for reference, on the map you see up there, the mixed-use economic center is the sort of turquoise area, and it's broken down into core and transitional, and the transitional is basically just the slashed area. So there's a bunch of TSA zones in the city along 4th South, along North Temple primarily, along the light rail lines, but this only applies, again, to the slashed area in turquoise, which is basically around the North Temple and Redwood Road intersection. I'll get the big question, elephant in the room out of the way first, of why in the world would we allow drive-throughs in a TSA zone, because it's supposed to be pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented, and all that. And when we started this process, that was quite bluntly the bias we went into it of, this is supposed to be walkable, oriented to transit, so why have drive-throughs? And it's sort of a conversation of going from the theoretical down to the practical. And the two areas in the city that are zoned for TSA are basically along the light rail lines, 4th South and North Temple. So drive-throughs have been prohibited on 4th South since about 2004, about 15 years, and North Temple a little less than that. And as we look at what's happened, in most cases, it's redeveloped how we thought it would. I think many of us hoped there'd be more mixed-use buildings instead of just exclusive apartment buildings, but the scale and the densities have changed. One thing that hasn't changed is 4th South is, even though it's transit, even though we're trying to encourage pedestrians, de facto, it's kind of the northeast quadrant of I-215. It still carries a lot of cars. It's US 40. So the whole car component hasn't gone away just because transit's there. It's kind of the same with North Temple. And how that plays out is many of the former uses that had drive-throughs, the restaurants, they've become sort of entrenched, because now they're a rare commodity that enjoys a non-conforming status. So you see a lot of redevelopment of sites that were strip commercial or offices and that, but some of the drive-throughs have become more entrenched, and I think this really became obvious when we had a development proposed at 4th East and 4th South, where there was a non-conforming Taco Bell or something, and when the new apartment building came in, because they wanted to hang on to that drive-through, they designed the whole apartment building around the little drive-through. Doesn't look like a Taco Bell anymore, but everything was built around that very valuable thing on an auto corridor. So that's where we started thinking, well, maybe having a little bit of latitude wouldn't be so bad, because if you remember the old bank that was at Trolley Corners, that actually was designed very urban, and the drive-through went through the building. There, maybe if we would have had some options, we could have designed a drive-through that was urban without sort of entrenching this. So that was sort of the philosophical of no drive-throughs. Well, maybe we need to not be so rigid. And when it gets down to this specific request, again, it's back to the corner of Redwood Road and North Temple, and we began looking at the master plan for that corridor. And there's a lot of policies in that master plan that pretty much acknowledge that that's always going to have a heavy auto orientation to that particular corner. And if you go out and you look at the land uses, yes, there's new apartments being built in this zone, but there's also a lot of fast food drive-throughs, gas stations, and bank drive-throughs. In the TSA MUEC transitional, we already allow drive-throughs for banks. So part of the thing was, well, where this is particularly mapped is the furthest away you can get from transit on North Temple. It's not in the core, it's in the transitional area. We already allow drive-throughs for banks. So what the staff and the planning commission did is say, okay, we'll consider drive-throughs for restaurants, but we'll put right in the zoning, no, you can't do it in the front yard. And I don't mean to shame anybody here, but an example would be like McDonald's on 4th South or 5th South and 2nd West that has turnaround and drive-through on the street, whereas the design guidelines put in here would force something more like the Chick-fil-A and Sugar House, which on the street has dining and everything, and the drive-through takes place in the rear. So that was sort of the compromise of, okay, we allow drive-throughs for banks. This is the least transit-oriented of all the transit zones. We put the design criteria in there, and we make it a conditional use so that the planning commission can worry about backing, stacking for autos and all that stuff. And so that's how we ended up with a positive recommendation. Sorry if that was long-winded, but.
Okay, other questions or comments?
Oh, it was awesome. Great presentation. When I was in the planning division, we worked on this TSA with Nick Norris and Nick Britton, which I mentioned earlier. And so I like this reasonable approach about the flexibility that we need to have sometimes, because as planners, we do our best, but sometimes might miss something or circumstances change, and so we need to have this kind of flexibility. So I'm for this project and for this amendment. So thank you so much, Doug, for explaining really well what's going on that corner.
I do have a couple of slides in here because the petitioner did provide some examples of exactly how they could do something that's more urban and responds to the street and still have a drive-through. So this is not necessarily the proposal, but just to show how you can have both.
Great. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Johnston.
Thanks. I support it for all the reasons you've talked about. And Redwood Road and I-80 and this intersection are making it a little interesting compared to other TSA areas. Is there anywhere else in the city that has this transitional zoning and this number at all?
Well, there's a bunch of subcategories of, mixed-use economic center. I can't remember all the names. And each subcategory has a core and a transitional. Mm-hmm. So right now, this is the only place in the city that it's zoned that. Now, in the future, somebody could ask for a rezone and would have to consider all these things. But
this conditional use would only apply to this particular one or all of those subcategories?
This proposed amendment would only apply to the MUEC transitional.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. If we want to bring the applicant forward. If you could just introduce yourself and walk us through your outline, that'd be great.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Lori Hendricks, and I work with Gaddis Investments. And I just did a quick timeline of how we ended up with this in this position. It's actually been a great opportunity to go through this and to gain a little bit of insight on what you guys do here. A sliver of an insight, I can see that. I hope this is as fun as the RDA meeting was. So this all started 2 years ago when the property that we had on the northeast corner of North Temple and Redwood Road came available for lease. It's circled in the black right in the middle of the photo there. Our initial marketing efforts were focused on the theme of the North Temple Master Plan. We wanted to encourage a more walkable and transit-oriented neighborhood. By December of that year, it was clear that the market was dictating a different direction, and we had reached out to Normal Ice Cream, Penguin Brothers, Rock Taco, and explored food truck staging on our location, just to name a few of our efforts. Local tenants just didn't seem to have any interest in this space. Gas stations felt there was too much competition in the area, and banks and credit unions were interested, but the lot proved too small to accommodate their needs. Beans and Brews, Starbucks, Porta Subs, Marco's Pizza, Costa Vida, Cup Bop, Panda, Swig are a few of the many vendors that wanted this space, but they required the drive-through, which we can't provide. And then despite aggressive efforts in a robust market, we weren't able to fill our space with a tenant that met the zone requirements. We began to feel a bit desperate, and in the fall of 2017, we started meeting with several of you and several planners to try to understand what our options would be. Vandalism was an ongoing, costly burden for us. Our electric panels and plumbing were dismantled, wires were stripped, walls and ceilings had been ruined. And a year ago in July 2018, we decided to submit the paperwork to the city requesting help with the zoning requirements. Under financial pressure, we decided to lease our space below market on a month-to-month to this Admission Plus operator. And then, as Doug showed you, we worked with Angela Dean, and she was a city planner and worked on the North Temple Master Plan. And we feel that she helped us come up with an idea that would enhance our corner with the flavor of the master plan and work with the reality of the market. This is not the exact plan we're proposing. It's just an idea of how we want to include the neighborhood and be open to more of a walkable area if the area can make that change. I'm through if you have any questions or concerns.
Questions or comments for the applicant? Okay.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you very much for your proposal. I think it looks great. And while that corner is not my district, I'm familiar with that area and the lack of viable options for both residents and visitors. So I really like this, and thank you for your persistence and not giving up on this. What I often worry about is that we have ordinances and requirements that are there for all matters, not just easy ones. This is one that I think was caught up. Now that said, I'm not saying that we should redo our zoning and forget our ordinances, but sometimes the ordinances don't match reality, and I think this may be one of those times. Sorry if I'm offending you, Nick. No offense. It's not your deal. So but thank you for your persistence. I think a lot of times property owners, when they're in situations like this, just get fed up and give up and move on. You've kept the issue hot, and in government, that's sometimes what you have to do. So thank you for your willingness to do that. I think this looks great. If there are no further comments, we'll move to the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to jump back to number 2. Oh.
I was just going to comment on Nick Norris's haircut.
Well, do you know what? There is always time for comments on Nick Norris's haircut, so.
I just have one. I just have one last comment, Charlie.
Yeah.
For this developer, I've known them for a little bit from my previous work in the West Side, and they've been very involved with the community, asking them what they would like to see, and not giving up, and being really open to some ideas. So I'm really in favor of this
Right.
change. Thanks.
They say about Panthers.
Yeah. West High, blah, blah, blah. So item number 2 on our agenda is informational. It's an update on Opportunity Zone Prospectus. Allison Rowland with the council office is going to lead this off, and then Laura Fritz is here as well.
I will lead this off only by saying there was not a staff report associated with this, and we just want Laura to do her thing.
Well, thank you, and thanks, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Luke. 3 years ago, James Rogers, who was the chairman of the city council at that point, had sent a letter to the mayor sharing thoughts of the council as to what economic development should potentially prioritize in their first few years of operation. And one of the items on that list was to participate in a life science corridor. And it's something that we thought about and we kicked around internally, and we kept sort of thinking, well, what does that mean and how does it work and what should we do with it? And then it was like everything, all the stars aligned, and we came up with what we think is a really interesting idea. And it really stemmed from the opportunity zones. And so this is our prospectus. You may remember that our federal lobbyist, Simon Group, came in and had talked about how cities can best capture opportunity zone funding was through creating these prospectus. And so we started to work on a prospectus and really realized that there was a lot of overlap between life sciences and opportunity zones. And so you could really change the word life science into innovation, you could change it into technology, but for today's purpose, we're going to talk about it as part of a life science idea. And when we started to look at a prospectus, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing some really important items, that the areas were prime for growth. There was a capital demand for these areas that we were going to nominate for opportunity zone funding. And life sciences, we felt, was this opportunity to build a corridor from Research Park to the Northwest Quadrant where we're seeing a lot of manufacturing happen, and how do we connect the two? And then, institutional capacity. Did we have the ability to support this industry? And fortunately, with Salt Lake Community College and our career pathways programs and the university, we did have a lot of institutional capacity. Some of these slides you're already going to know the data on, but 200,000 people, 9,000 jobs have been facilitated since 2016. And we recently did some data crunching. As Danny said earlier today, I do like data. And one of the things that we found is that over the last year, the number of prospects that have come and worked with our department have really been in that life science space, which we thought was fascinating. And so if there's all these companies coming and talking to us, maybe it's an industry that we need to be focusing even more attention on. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing that. As you know, we've been able to facilitate more than $1 billion in the last 3 years. And we think that the opportunity zones are just another way for us to be able to see investment occur in our city. And we really chose the opportunity zones to maximize impact, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. When we nominated these zones, we nominated 12 of them, and I'm really happy to say that we received 7, technically 8, because a surrounding city may have nominated one of our census tracts, which was Mill Creek, and so technically we have 8. And one of the things about life science that we're really fascinated about is that of 383 metro areas that have a life science cluster, we rank 26, which is good, but I always want to be great, right?
Will you say that in a different way?
Yeah. So 383 clusters nationwide.
Okay.
26 of them, we ranked 26th of the 383.
And what is this, the measure?
It's a measure of the concentration of life science companies in your area.
And our metropolitan area is as big as the county, or is it WFRC, MPO?
I think they're picking up WFRC.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's really interesting. And so how do we get to closer to number one, right? And that for us is how do we help facilitate development? And Salt Lake City for life science, we're ranked number 4 in STEM careers. We are home to amazing companies like ARUP and Biomeric, Stryker, Varian. We're also got great proximity and a strategic location. We're a gigabit network, and we have outdoor paradise. And I know there's other things going on right now, so I'm trying to make it fast. A little bit of things happening today. Of course, Salt Lake City's information, but one of the really interesting things for the state of Utah is they've also identified medical pathways as a great opportunity. And so they've started programs to make sure that we're pipelining talent into medical careers. And some of the projects that can be funded through Talent Ready, marketing campaigns to encourage people to go into the careers, building a makerspace or a lab so people can try out these career fields, and then also enhancing diversity of the medical innovation that happens in our communities, but using it through CTE offerings within our public schools. And since 2009, there's been a lot of activity in this program. 80 projects have been supported, 10 million in funding, 174 training programs, which is pretty exciting. And that's only in really 4 industry clusters. And about 6,000 people have gone through that program. And it also included about $1.1 million for post-secondary and trade association tracks, and $1 million that went specifically to public schools or districts and charter schools. And here are just some of the companies that have participated, and you may notice that many of these are here in Salt Lake City. And so we think that that is really an indicator of these companies wanting to continue to grow here, but are looking for the talent. And Utah has also done a great job in making sure that our credentials are stackable, that you can start out with a certificate program, go to an associate's, go to a bachelor's degree, all through the continuum. And again, that is really a magnificent opportunity for our students who want to come out and have careers today. Salt Lake City also has a number of life science companies, and you can see that they range. And we really tried to pull the largest ones, but everything from medical device to genomic work is happening right here in our community. So knowing that we had this amazing cluster, and it was a cluster that was growing, and we saw the opportunity zones as an opportunity to capture those companies, we wanted to make sure that we better understood what the opportunity zones were. And so they really are a funding vehicle that are organized as corporations or partnerships that can make investments into opportunity zones. And this program was created through the Tax Cuts and Job Act of 2017. You may remember that this was going to be a new program that everyone was very excited about. And really the intent was to draw long-term investment into underserved areas of communities, and both urban and rural. And so what this program does is it allows an investor to defer their taxes for 5 years. Then once they've deferred it, the new gain that's created has a reduction over a period of time. And so 10% on the gains if accrued if held for more than 5 years, 15% if held for 7, and then forgiveness on the new gain after 10 years. And so there's been a lot of investors who are really interested in deferring that capital gain, placing the money into a fund. And so Salt Lake City's Department of Economic Development looked at creating a fund. And what we found is that there's like 500 funds being created. In fact, one of them is a $500 million fund. So should we be really in the business of going out and trying to create a fund, or should we be out there trying to find projects and be a matchmaker? And it felt like that made more sense for the resources that we have. The program also allows you to invest in 3 things: property, partnership interest, and stock. So that essentially means you can invest in 2 things. You can invest in the real estate side, but you can also invest in the business side. Who needs most capital? Life science companies, really capital intensive. So again, for us, it just seemed like that was a good match. When we put together the opportunity zones, we wanted to make sure that we were dispersing them across the city. And so you can see that the map really does disperse it throughout the city. And we wanted to make sure that we were maximizing existing programs, that we weren't recreating the wheel. So we wanted to make sure that it was in an RDA project area. If we were going to nominate that census tract to the governor, was it an RDA project area? Was it New Market tax credit eligible? And then last but not least, was it community development block grant eligible? If it met those criteria, it ended up in a tier 1, which was a census tract that we were going to nominate to the governor. Ultimately, there were 2 exceptions to that rule. The first being the Northwest Quadrant. The Northwest Quadrant is not CDBG eligible. However, we knew that the governor was going to nominate it. We figured if they was going to nominate it, we probably should put it in. And then last was the census tract that Mill Creek put in. That one was not selected by us, so we don't know the criteria that they followed to make that census tract selection. Other things that we thought about: could we absorb the new capital in this market? Was there an economic need? Was there an entrepreneurial drive? And we were basically able to say yes to all the other considerations. So when we started down this path of thinking about a corridor, I asked one of our talented staff to show me where the talent was. Where are the companies in Salt Lake City of over 100 employees or more? And you can see there were these 2 clusters that started to form. One was here at Research Park. You can see the little square box with the arrow pointing to it. But there was also this healthcare around the university. But then as you looked over by the airport and just south and west of it, you can see all those blue dots start to show up. And that's where the manufacturing was happening. And so it became really obvious that between Research Park and Northwest Quadrant, there was an opportunity to be able to accelerate technology. And if you look, there's this random blue dot at Census Tract 102-500 where Recursion Pharmaceuticals is. Here's a company that graduated from Research Park, wasn't quite to a manufacturing stage, but still needed office space. And so how do we have more Recursion Pharmaceuticals happening? And you can see our opportunity zones overlay with RDA project areas. And then what we did is we took each one of the census tracts that were approved, and we talked about what was there today, what was the zoning, and then we talked about how we think the top transformation strategies should play out in terms of life sciences. And then we also wanted to make sure that as we were talking to investors and developers, that they understood that there was a demand. Our vacancy rates are really low in each one of these census tracts, and so showcasing that for an investor. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one of these. But then, last but not least, we really did talk a lot about how we layer cake these incentives. And so the RDA tools for investors is just one other tool that we can put in the toolbox to maximize how those opportunity funds get deployed. And then you can see we go into greater detail into the zoning categories for each one of the areas to showcase that while if you drive down North Temple today, you may not think of this as a life science area, but it is zoned, it is ready. We could start building smaller office buildings to help support the residents there, as well as to help facilitate ongoing growth of this industry. And then just general information about the opportunity zones, who to contact here at the city. So are there any questions? Yes, yes. So Ben Collender will be replacing my name on that, as well as Danny and Roberta, because all three of them are incredibly well-versed on this plan. The next steps for us is we are working on a more in-depth life science plan that is being worked on by one of our interns for the summer, so.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, Councilmember Rogers and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Laura, which of the 7 zones that we have do you think, in order, do you think are going to be the most potential, have the most potential?
I guess it depends on.
I mean, you with your experience and foresight on your way out, what do you see, what do you envision happening with these?
I think that Granary District, because there's so much activity happening there, it likely will be utilizing opportunity zones a lot, but I see it primarily for adding housing into that market. There is a lot of industrial space being converted over to office today, but really for the tech industry, maybe not so much for life science. But I really do see sort of North Temple area and going up 3rd West, 4th West, being an incredible opportunity, because there are smaller office buildings there that could easily be purchased, converted, and invested in. And so I really do see that as an opportunity. And then the Northwest Quadrant, as we continue to look at the growth of the companies, when they get to a manufacturing stage, hopefully they'll utilize a program like Opportunity Zones to help facilitate their capital investment. But right now, the first few deals that we've seen done in opportunity zones have been in housing. Mm-hmm. And we really want to start changing that narrative, because we think that there's an office demand here too.
So, and then I guess a follow-up question to that is that in looking at this, do you see any changes through planning that would help this? And also with the opportunity zones, what's the sunset that people can invest to get their maximum potential back?
Both great questions. So in terms of zoning, our planning department has done a great job in really teeing up flexible zoning in all areas of the opportunity zones. So we feel really comfortable that there won't have to be a lot of rezone that occurs. In terms of maximizing the benefit, there is a little bit of a timeline for that. To maximize as of right now, we think that there's going to be some changes coming based on what we're hearing, but as of right now, you have to make the investment to maximize the 10-year by the end of this calendar year, so December of 19. We think that'll change, though.
You do?
Because it took so long for guidance to come out that everyone was a little bit behind, and now we're trying to chase to catch up, that I think you'll see them extend that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's everyone in the country, right? Like everyone is kind of following.
Everyone,
Okay.
yeah. It's been a national conversation. We, within the International Economic Development Council, which is
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. We have this amazing professional group, and we've done a number of sort of information sessions about opportunity zones, and we recently did one where the Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group came here to Salt Lake City to our conference that we just held, and for the first time ever, I think economic developers went, oh, now we get it, because it was somebody who could really talk about how they get invested, what they're looking for in terms of investments. And so I think, and here that was, a month ago? Not even.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's still a lot of uncertainty and unknown about them is a little bit of a challenge. But, those that are doing investment are on it and are starting to use it.
Great.
Yeah.
Questions? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks, Laura. I'm excited about this opportunity, and I've been intrigued by Bruce Katz's work with Louisville and some other cities to help cities prepare for really the best growth and the right kind of growth through opportunity zones. And the Accelerator for America website has been something I've come back to time and again, and they talk about creating a prospectus for the city that really talks about the economic and the governmental context for really at the local level for how each of these zones is situated, and then really that the last mile of the prospectus piece is talking about what I feel like a lot of the slides have been about, and here's how we'd like to see your investments directed. So can you talk to me about the sort of that prospectus pre-qualification statement angle, and do we have something like that?
So there's been a lot of work done at the state and county level to look at sort of the more regional conversation about opportunity zones. And in fact, the Sorensen Impact Institute is looking for some of the best practices and is also helping with doing some initial mapping to help investors understand where the opportunity zones are, what are some of the basic background information on each one of the census tracts. What we've done is we've now taken that one step further to say that's really good broad information, but as we bring it down to the local level, how a developer is going to use it for housing either way, but how do we get them to think about opportunity zones in maybe a way that they hadn't been thinking about it? And so that's really why we sort of push towards being much more detailed and industry specific in the prospectus that we put together. We've also talked about doing multiple, that we have a life science prospectus. We do one around housing. We do one for technology. And I think over the next few months, you'll see us start to put a little more thought into those.
So are you saying that governmental and economic layer is happening at the state level?
The state and county. Yeah, the Association of Counties has really been taking the lead out on those more kind of higher level. Now, we still did a higher level within this, talking about the city, here's how many people we have, how many, and candidly, we modeled this off of Louisville.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't see the kind of that context of the uniqueness of Salt Lake City government, the uniqueness of our affordable housing investments, the dynamicism of our RDA, which is really, I think, quite unique compared to any other city in the county or even in the state. So anyway, I'd love to learn more, I guess, about how we are, I think we have an opportunity to uniquely highlight the opportunity that Salt Lake City government presents relative to the other 16 in the county.
We agree. That's why we jumped out ahead and did our own.
Absolutely. Councilmember Johnston.
Sure. Thank you very much for this. Initially, though, there was a belief that housing would not be a lucrative investment for these types of zones. What has changed, I guess, since that seems to be low-hanging fruit?
That's a great question, and I've been wanting to sit down with some of the developers that are utilizing it. PEG Development, I think, did it as part of Paper Box Lofts. They put Opportunity Zone funds in. CW Urban just announced that they're using Opportunity Zone funds for one of their projects, and now, because they're all women's names, they're all going to run together, so I'm not going to tell you which one, because I'd be a liar. But CW Urban is also doing it, and so I would love to sort of learn how come they're now jumping into Opportunity Zone funding as part of their capital stacks.
So you do believe, based on the delay and the clarification of how this is going to work, that they'll extend the deadline at some point? Do you imagine it'll still be forecasting? It was meant to be a time-limited thing, obviously. They want a 10-year cap on this for various reasons. Is that likely to stay the same, or?
I would love to say that. So you can still qualify for the 10 years. You just can't maximize the benefit. And so the maximizing is if you invest by the end of this year. But you can still capture the growth.
Sure.
Without having to, while still deferring the taxes. But, who knows what the federal government's going to do, and I don't want to, I don't even want to, try to guess. But I really do think that there has been enough conversation about it, not just at the local levels, but also from the investor levels. And those are really the ones that the federal government want to see making those investments. And so if they're getting enough pushback,
they'll do it.
I think you'll see them make the change.
So the last question, Mr. Chair, if I could. How much collaboration with the University of Utah has been as part of this? And going forward, if you have different type of perspectives, so to speak, what's their role?
I love that question. So we have worked very closely with the university. When I first read this idea of the life science corridor in this letter 3 years ago, one of the first meetings I had was with Jonathan Bates at the university, and we are now, through the redevelopment agency, working with them on the master plan for Research Park. How do you free up that 100 acres of surface parking and actually develop additional early stage spaces? Of course, what we're seeing happen out by the Northwest Quadrant, the university is starting to say, well, wait a minute, you're right, there is this whole cluster happening. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation. And then we've really sort of opened their eyes to how do you connect them, right? How do you create those accelerator spaces? And so the university's been a great partner.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Laura, on the, is there a website specific to the opportunity zones? When I go to economic development, I'm not finding anything on opportunity zones.
There is a page. Ben is going to send you the link to the page.
Great, thanks, Ben.
But the prospectus is there. There's information there, and also, most importantly, who to contact to continue your conversation.
And perhaps we could elevate that on the website, either on the business page or the economic development, business development or economic development. It's not easy to find. Thanks.
Okay. Seeing no further questions or comments, Laura, thank you so much for your work on this and your team's work.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is item number 4, an ordinance regarding D2 Downtown Support District Design Standard Zoning Text Amendment. Russell Weeks is going to join us at the table from the council staff, and then John Anderson will join us from CAN. And Nick Norris is going to join with his new hair. Spiffy.
I mean, I got a haircut too, but okay.
Yours is less spiffy.
There's less.
Mine's less spiffy too.
Well, there's
so,
a lot less of it, so to spiff, but.
Okay, Russell, turn the time over to you.
Well, to start, this is, if one thinks about the downtown master plan of in the council adopted in 2016 as point A, this proposed ordinance is a point B, and it's going to lead to some other things. The proposed ordinance fulfills some of the requirements or some of the goals in the downtown master plan. There are 2 small policy discussion questions that staff prepared. One is whether the term affordable housing is sufficient for the city council, or would the council be more interested in using a percentage of area median income to further define affordable housing. The caveat there is once you define what affordable housing is, then you might either balkanize the thing or have competing areas. The other policy question is whether the city design review is sufficient for the city council for buildings taller than 65 feet in the D2 zone. Other areas have a shorter point of where design review kicks in. Other than that, I'm going to leave it to the planners to discuss their work.
Sure, I'll keep it fairly brief. The D2 zone is mostly located south of downtown, and it does cover most of the southern gateways and western gateways into the downtown area. So a lot of highly visible sites. There's a lot of development pressure in the area. I think the biggest, most obvious example is the Sears property on State Street, which really that vacancy became a real catalyst for reviewing the current design standards in the district. As of right now, the D2 zone has no design standards whatsoever except for height. So there's really no way for the city to really influence the design of any structures and how it impacts streets and neighborhoods. We're proposing to add several design standards of zone. So this will look at height and placement of the building, exterior building materials, ground floor uses, doors, glass, pushing building towards the street, putting parking in the rear, of course. Just ways to actually activate the streets with windows, active ground floor uses, and then just better materials with requiring durable building materials and a specific amount of glazing on the bottom floor, on the ground floor, and also on upper floors, which is actually a design standard that we haven't used in other zones. Most of the standards were based on existing zones of similar scale. So we looked at TSA and Sugargrass Business District and kind of compared those with that. The public engagement period, we met with stakeholders, community councils, the Main Street America group, anybody you could get to talk to us in the D2 zone. The support for the changes were almost generally unanimous. Even architects and builders were kind of shocked to find out you could build a 60-foot tall metal building anywhere south of downtown. Planning Commission reviewed the changes and also recommended the council support the new design standards. So that's just a brief overview. I can go into any more details if you'd like or answer any questions.
Questions or comments before John moves forward? Councilmember Johnston.
The first policy question is a interesting one. I'm not sure we're ready to define affordable housing, but if we're having the statute that says you can get, I gotta remember now. The review would be waived if you have a minimum of 40% affordable housing. We haven't defined that. Is that going to cause problems immediately?
Yeah, that's something we definitely would want to define what that means, what that threshold is.
So leaving it open to us to interpret on a case-by-case basis is not a good policy?
No, and we have something similar in our, it's not, we have something similar in our parking chapter that does that, but it doesn't give us any direction. And
so we do need to do that sooner than later?
I would recommend that be part of, if the council wants to move in the direction of that as an incentive, that it be defined as part of this.
I would agree with that, Mr. Chair. I don't know how far we defer that discussion, but it seems to me that if this is going to work, we need to deal with that.
Okay.
Wait.
First off, Councilmember Fowler,
Thanks, Jane.
and then Councilmember Rogers.
Well, I'm actually a little bit concerned about waiving all design requirements for affordability and so I'm curious about that because I recognize that it costs more or it doesn't pencil if there's affordable housing, but I also recognize that we have issues with affordable housing being ugly stucco buildings. And I like the idea of having design requirements and at least some amount of design requirements for affordable housing units so that we're not stuck with stucco buildings downtown, right? So I don't know if there is a balance has been talked about regarding that instead of a waiver.
Sure. Just to respond to that, we agree with you. We don't want a bunch of giant stucco boxes either. So this is not a way to waive the design requirements. All the design requirements would be still in place. It's just that you could request additional height. And instead of normally going through a height exception or to request additional height, you have to go through the design review process. So there's an additional level of review with the Planning Commission that has additional standards. But all the other things about building materials and glass and all of that would still be required of any building, whether it's affordable or not.
Okay, so you may want to just restate that because I think my mind's going kind of crazy. So what this does not make it so that if you are building an affordable unit, you can cut out a lot of the more of the aesthetic stuff.
Yeah, the design standards
so the
would
design
apply no
standards
matter
stay
what.
the same.
Yes.
It's the process.
But you will be able to go higher if you add affordability. That would be one of the things that we'd be looking at, right?
You'd be able to get that additional building height without going through that design review process.
So we're not talking about removing aesthetics. We're not talking about removing other requirements for affordable housing. It's just that added piece. Okay, so
Yes.
I think I just read that wrong.
So I think.
Oh, no, I think that was a great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
So
I have a
that's good
follow-up
to
question to that, Mr. Chair. And Nick, maybe you can help me out with this. I'm having a hard time understanding why any developer would look at this as an incentive to say, you know what, I'm going to go from market rate to get myself some extra height and just say, and then convert it to 40%. I don't see that there are going to be a lot of developers that are going to bite on this.
And that may be one of the things that some projects who have sought various lending sources for affordable housing projects, when they have to go through a process and they don't have that entitlement in place, it delays their application. And so the incentive is time. And so it means that they could apply for those funds, and these are things that are funding sources outside of the city's control. It means that it takes that period of time out. And that period of time right now is about 90 days in the design review. A lot of that is applicants having to respond to updated drawings. Mm-hmm. So that's the incentive. And it's possible that someone might not utilize it.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks. Guys, didn't we do this back years ago when we were doing the form-based zoning around the streetcar line? And we made additional height basically above stick height available with some expedited processes if there was an inclusion of affordability.
That's correct.
And we haven't had anybody do it. And part of that, I think the assumption is that the building costs of switching from stick to steel just to get that extra height makes the affordability of or the benefits of adding that affordability and getting the height a wash.
Right. And in that case, the threshold that grants additional height is actually lower. It's below the top of what you could build under that construction type. So that construction type, it's hard to give you an exact number of how high you can go, but it's generally 75 to 80 feet. And best way to think about it, it's the height that a fire truck can reach. But so we haven't had a lot of those projects because that threshold was put at 60 feet. And so it would have granted an additional story if somebody did affordable. But what we've seen, and I think we kind of knew this, is that most of the properties along the S line were probably longer term development sites than rapid development sites. The ones that we thought were going to develop have gone through the development process, but they've chosen to have the products that they've had. So.
Which is really a discussion for us on inclusionary zoning, if we ever want to go there, because those properties that haven't been developed and the possibility that there's some affordability in there, we could make it a reality if we go there, but that's another discussion. So my question is, and I wanted to mention that in the policy question Russell brings up with the minimum of 10%, is that part of what Andrew was talking about? I think that we should increase that to 20% affordability. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want me to straw poll that kind of a change, a minimum, where right now it's at a minimum of 10%, and I'd like it to be increased to 20%. But
the actual percentage is they have to provide at least 40% affordable housing units.
So that's just the form-based special purpose.
Yeah, and so we're proposing 40, but I think one of the better questions brought up was what affordable housing means, and we need to respond to that before
right,
probably
and
approve
whether or
this.
not we box it in that regard. My apologies. I see that was a form-based number. But so my question is, are there other policy adjustments that we could make to expedite the development process to really further incentivize the creation of affordability besides just waiving the additional design review process? Because
Not from the zoning perspective. So zoning, basically, the only incentives that zoning really can provide are more development right or time. And so we can do those two things. So process equals time. And if we go to the approach of going more development right, then that might trigger some things that are that make the other construction types more feasible. But we still aren't necessarily seeing that in our market yet. And so when we're talking the type 1 construction, the steel construction, the projects that we've talked to developers about that are either on the table or moving forward are going to be market rate because the costs are still pretty high.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Mendenhall, are you still wanting to propose a straw poll?
That was for form-based
Okay. All right.
and not for this. I think Russell was just noting that there's a
Great.
discrepancy there.
Yeah, I think that, okay. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Fowler.
Yeah, it's more of a, I don't know who has the best answer to this, but a timeline issue, like when would we be potentially taking action on this? And when do we need to have that, what does affordable housing mean discussion? So I guess, I don't know who can best answer that.
Well, Councilmember Johnston seems to want to answer, so.
Mr. Chair, I think it's going to be, that's a good term. Arbitrary is a bad term, but we have a lot of information about where the gaps are as far as AMI goes. We know that below 40% is our biggest need. We know that 60% is probably next, and then 80. So we have some thresholds we could look at. I think it's sort of, we could discuss with Hand about what they feel the gap is in the city, if we want to target the biggest gap. The question for me is going to be the lower we go to, say, 40% AMI, the more expensive, and it may be counterproductive for developers to do this without a lot of help. I would, right now, just off the cuff, I would say 60 is probably where I would land if we're going to go in the middle. But we may want to just bounce that off of Hand and see if that jives with what they're seeing right now, or RDA, frankly, and see if that's where the NOFAs are coming in and those kind of things.
Sure.
Okay.
And we could initiate those conversations really quickly.
Okay.
So we could
Yeah.
respond quickly.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful, so.
Yeah, I think so too. If we can kind of get some of what you think that, just as Andrew said, what that number is, and then
Yeah.
we can talk to RDA as well and kind of get, and just collaborate on that definition and then bring this back.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. If you guys are willing to do that, I think.
Absolutely.
Just a point, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
You're going to set a date for a public hearing tonight. It will not be the August 6th date, because that has been moved to a work session. So it will be the meeting after August 6th. So there appears to be some time to get some information about the range of what affordable means.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Russell, thank you. Item number 5 on our agenda, an ordinance zoning map amendment for properties at 868 East, 2700 South, and 2716 South, 900 East. These are referred to as the 27th Street cottages. Nick Tarbett is going to join us at the table, as well as Lex Traber. Nick, the time's, Council Nick, time's over and time's up for you.
Yeah, we're not
And Nick
matching
Norris
today.
is going to stay again, so
I might just sit here all
you're always welcome.
I'm sorry, I was just looking, we know the applicant was coming, but if we get through this,
Okay, if the applicant is, you know that they are coming.
he said he was.
was here. I saw him, but I don't know where he went.
Okay.
Go. We can.
I have so many things to say, but I won't. Let's do this then. Let's move to item number 6, which is the capital improvement program projects. To give him some time. Do you want to see if he's out there?
Yeah, let me look.
Look to see if he's out there. If he's not here, then I think we can move forward with another item, but at the same time, that one has a 45-minute window that would be, that if he does come back in 5 minutes.
Maybe we go through it, and if there's questions afterwards that you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Questions, I mean, if it looks like it goes.
Did the applicant, I mean, was he really wanting to talk to the council, or was it just?
Not that I'm aware of. I think
Okay.
this is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Unless
So
you have,
if that's the
questions for me.
case, let's move forward. If he needs more time, we can give him that time. But I just don't want to have you guys sitting around for another 45 minutes while we talk about CIP. So, okay, Nick.
Okay, we'll just let Lex take it.
Okay, Lex.
So this is a request to rezone a couple of parcels located at basically 9th East and 2700 South. This was a rezone request that was submitted in conjunction with a plan development and a subdivision. The Planning Commission heard this. They've actually approved it twice now. The first time this rezone request was forwarded to your office, and their plan development and subdivision requests that came in with this rezone they expired because of an issue with an access. So they went back, they redesigned this, they went back to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission reapproved the plan development and the subdivision pending action on the rezone. And so that's why we're here before you this afternoon.
Great questions. I know this is right across the street from Amy's house.
Yes, it
because
is.
she just said that. So
Yes, it is. I'm making sure though. This is Barrett's Auto and the dry cleaning spot, right?
No.
So this is
on the south side of 2700 South. It's to the west of 9th East, and there's an abandoned residence there. It's boarded.
oh yeah, that one.
That one, and it's kind of an L-shaped property, as you can see on this.
Pretty sure there's people living in there.
There's been a problem. So that abandoned
just
home
off
is
the street
here,
from Pidge.
and then there is an existing home here that will remain and be rehabbed as part of the subdivision plan development.
Okay.
great. Questions, Councilmember Mendenhall?
Will you talk to me about square footage? Maybe I didn't dig deep enough in the packet, but how little are the cottages? Are they bumping at our minimum?
In terms of height,
No, square footage.
well,
Because it sounds like a tiny house, but heaven forbid.
it's not. These are 5,000 square foot lots. They average 5,000
Oh,
square
okay.
foot. So
They're quite large.
they are, and the Planning Commission has to grant approval for lot sizes that are averaged, and they exceed that 5,000 square foot overall. So it doesn't increase the density that they're allowed, but it just adds some flexibility in lot design.
Just so it's clear, I like tiny houses, and I'd be really excited if you were talking to us about how to make tiny houses available in Salt Lake City. And so talk to us about, can we go to the page 2 on the Planning Commission, the 3 issues that the staff report identified there? So I get about the street frontage adjustment. And then issue 2 is about the reduced front yard setback to 4 feet. But let's talk about issue 3.
So issue 3 has to do with that lot size averaging. And this lot 4 is actually going to be 4,000, about 4,100 square feet.
Yeah.
But lot 5 is 6,700. So if you add up all the lot sizes on the 5 lots, they exceed the 5,000 square foot, which is the minimum for our own 5,000 zone.
Okay, but that's kind of strange, isn't it? Is this a precedent?
No, so within a plan development, the Planning Commission has the ability to modify lot sizes as long as it doesn't result in an overall increase in density. And the density is based on the total lot area of the development. And so some lots may be larger and some may be smaller as long as they all average to at least 5,000 square feet.
Thank you. Will you explain to me about access to lots 3 and 4?
So the access to lots 3 and 4, this is 2700 South up here. And so all the access for both of those lots occurs here. They come in here. This is the access to lot 4, and then there's this shared access here, which would get access to lot 3.
And is that driveway also shared by lot 2?
No, those lots 1 and 2 would take access directly off of. Lot 1 will take access off of 27th South. Lot 2 will access through here, through the rear. The front of that home on Lot 2 will face 2700 South.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it looks like actually all of them access through that driveway. Because the garages are all in the rear.
So lot 1.
Lot 1 as well.
What kind of assurance, while you're looking that up, what kind of assurances do we have when it comes to a shared system like that, especially in a planned unit development, that they aren't going to come back to Salt Lake City and say, look, it's crumbling and we can't we don't have enough money, and make this an alleyway so you can fill it for us.
So the plan development ordinance requires the applicant to submit, I can't remember the length of the term, but basically an estimate on how much it's going to cost to maintain the shared infrastructure that's private. I think it's over a 40-year period. So they submit that.
40, you
I
said?
think so. I can't remember the exact years, but I think that's what the ordinance says. And so we keep that on file so that 30 years down the road, if somebody comes in, we can show them that what its anticipated costs and things like that. Obviously, there's no guarantee someone isn't going to ask the city to do something, but we do have the private street dedication process where those in order for the city to accept private infrastructure, has to be built to certain city construction standards, maybe not with.
This isn't going to be built to that.
This is not going to be
No
built to
way.
that. So the ordinance
So-
wouldn't allow the city to accept it.
Yeah, so how in 41 years do we not end up with this on our plates? Because we've had properties like this in the last year or two. I mean, in the 6 years I've been here, I can think of a few who have come to us and said, we need help. We've been here decades and now it's not working and we don't have the money and this wasn't our fault because we didn't build it. So why, I guess I'm wondering why 40 years, why not 99 years?
I don't know why the 40 years was put in the ordinance. It's been there since we've had, as long as I've known the plan development ordinance. So I don't know that there's anything that we can do that would guarantee somebody not approaching the city about that issue.
Can you just write it in there? Don't come back to us asking for us to pave your driveway. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, questions or comments?
Yeah, just real quick.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of looking through the staff report now, but what was comments by the community? Because it's literally 4 houses away from where I live, and I walk by that area every day, and that house, there's something needs to be done. However, putting 4 houses on there, I'm okay with it. I don't mind. I'm good with density, but I know some neighbors may not be. So what kind of comments did we hear from the community, if any?
The community council, first of all, is in support. We really didn't hear comments concerning the density. In the previous iteration, there was an access from 27 South, a walking access, pedestrian access from 27 South through to Claiborne Circle, which is to the south. This iteration did not include that, and there were people that were still concerned about that. And now that had been eliminated, a lot of those concerns had also gone by the wayside. Those were the major issues that we heard.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Nick?
The applicant did make it. Colin Strasser did make it. So
Oh, great. Okay. You have up to 5 minutes if you have any issues. So.
Hello, my name's Colin Strasser. Happy to be here. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate Lex's hard work on this project, and everybody in the city has been helpful in this project, and I'm glad to finally bring it to fruition, hopefully in the next, few months. So I'm excited to get this process here to this point and get some single-family houses built in Salt Lake City. I missed kind of most of the conversation, but we do have an iteration that I don't think anybody has found. There's been zero pushback, I guess, from neighbors, and everybody is pretty much on the same boat that they want to see something going here. And 4 single-family houses and rehabbing the house on 900 East is kind of a vision I think that everybody can get behind, and that's what we'd like to do. And so, appreciate your time. If there's a question, I would love to answer.
Oh, I don't think we have questions. Staff did a really good job.
Maybe there was one.
Oh, Aaron does.
I'm sorry.
Oh, and Anna does too.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. I wondered if you're going to be running any of your utilities under the driveway.
Under the driveway? Yes, we are. We're going to be running water and possibly a sewer line. Underneath which driveway, though?
The shared driveway.
Yeah, so I've
Isn't it all shared driveway?
Yeah, so it's on the side there is the one that we kind of share with maybe people that are outside of the subdivision, and it's the duplex, the Richardson. I've spoken with them a ton. We've got a shared maintenance agreement set up to manage that, and they're excited for the potential of putting 4 houses there that can share that, so that he doesn't have that full cost burden of that access. And so we worked it out that we're kind of split everything one for 5 cost basis on any of the repairs going forward, and he's excited to have that replaced and made nice from its current status as kind of being something that probably needs to be replaced maybe the next 10 years. So when we replace it, we'll put something there that probably should last at least 20 years without needing much maintenance. So that was kind of our fix on that, was to replace it.
Can I?
Yep. Councilmember Fowler.
Like I said, this is right in my neighborhood.
Great.
And
Sure.
so I'm looking forward to seeing what goes on there. I know that neighborhood pretty well. And I'm also excited to hear, because I was wondering about that access way by the duplex, because there's that ugly fence right there and all of that. And so it'll be nice to have a little update in that corner. Then we have a new project across the kitty corner from you. So that whole corner is changing a lot right now.
It is. It's
And-
fun. After a long time of not so much change, there's a lot coming to it.
I'm looking forward to watching this project happen. So thank you. I'm glad we're finally doing something there. I've seen the sign up a lot saying we're going to have something here soon, and now we hopefully are. So good luck to you, and thank you.
No, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So now we will talk about capital improvement program projects. Ben Lutke will join us, as well as Dan Ripp. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, is Dan here? Dan is here. John, I can't remember why we were going to have you guys go before CIP.
I think
What were the logistical?
I think as Councilmember Johnston was planning to
That's right.
to leave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, so we're not going to do capital improvement now. We'll now talk about funding our future because Councilmember Johnston has to leave at 6. Well, let's go ahead and let's talk about it now. We'll do CIP after. So thanks, Dan. Okay, so we're gonna do number 7 on our agenda, which is funding our future. Transit, second addendum to the interlocal agreement with Utah Transit Authority. And Kira is at the table, and she's going to be joined by John and Julianne.
All right, so I'll just get us oriented to where we are real quick. I think most of us are familiar with funding our future at this point. We're here to discuss the second addendum to the interlocal agreement with UTA. Implementing enhanced bus service is one of the major goals that serves the critical needs that were identified in the Funding Our Future initiative. So this addendum is funded by the sales tax revenue raised during Funding Our Future. The interlocal agreement, which the council adopted in February of this year, governs the overall details of the service partnership between UTA and the city and how costs are calculated and will be updated. The addenda to the interlocal agreement govern specific aspects of the service. So the first addendum that the council adopted in tandem with the interlocal agreement back in February covered the mobilization costs for service that's beginning this year. This addendum that the council is considering today authorizes funding for a year of the enhanced service on routes 2, 9, and 21, which begin this August. The budget impact has actually been reduced by nearly $1 million from $5,300,000 to about $4,300,000. We understand that this is due to refinement since the original estimates. The decrease is the topic of the first two policy questions, so if the council wants to explore that, there's some questions outlined that may help with that discussion. The addendum refers service to the details of the service to the Phase 1 service improvement map that reflects the routes for these 3 routes. We have just become aware, though, that one of the routes planned for implementation this August does have a significant change from the exhibits in the addendum. The service map in the contract indicates that Route 9 extends to North Temple along Redwood Road, but for the August deployment of the route, it's planned to stop at 4th South. I'll go ahead and turn that over to the administration, who can speak to this in some more depth, and then I'll defer the rest of the discussion to any questions that the council has.
Thank you.
Hello. Nice to see you all again. It's exciting for us to be here. About a month away, what is today, the 9th, so a month and a couple days away from actually implementing this service and seeing it out on the street. It's one of the most exciting things I think I've personally worked on in my professional career, and I think it's amazing for all of us to have been a part of this. I know the UTA folks are trying to get here. This is moved up a bit on the agenda, so they're trying to get here quickly. But I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge UTA and say how much we appreciate the hard work that they did, not only to make this happen, but to give us almost $1 million in savings right out of the gate is no small feat. Their teams worked really hard to structure these routes and block them in a way that was very efficient and cost effective. And I think that that's a really great sign of the partnership that we have with UTA and their willingness to help us be successful in this endeavor. And, you know, any money that we can save, you know, a portion of that we want to set aside for when they're able to complete that last small portion of Route 9. But any additional savings, that's just money that we can put towards planning for and getting ready for 6th and 10th North, which will be our next implementation. And so, again, I just want to thank this team, the administration, and the council for all the work that's been done to get us to this point. We're so close to seeing that service come out on the street. And it took a lot of people coming together and working extremely fast and hard to make sure that that happened. And again, to UTA for working hard to save us money that we can reinvest back into the system for our residents to give them amazing service.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers, and then Councilmember Fowler, and then we'll go to this side.
So my question is in regards to the short change on the 9th route, not making it to North Temple, but apparently that's only temporary, is that correct?
Yeah.
That is correct.
So nothing has really changed other than we're going to have a front door stop up at the U of U for West Side residents, right?
Correct.
And by front door, you mean to the University of Utah Medical
Hospital.
Center. And that was something we really had to fight for. And I think we had brought that up earlier in the year, that someone high up at the medical center up there didn't like all the buses getting in the way of the parking lot. And we made a kind of a stink about that, and I'm glad we did. And they listened, to their credit, so we're grateful for that.
And Nicole is actually here. I just saw her walk in. I know UTA scrambled to get her to be here for the earlier time frame for us to sit at the table. So I think it's really important that UTA comes and talks to you about the modifications that were necessary for Route 9, why those changes needed to be made, and the temporariness of those changes, and the lengths that we're going to make sure that we're working hard to get that implemented as soon as possible. And then from our side, I think it's important for you all to know that we are making changes. We've made adjustments to the trips to transit area so that we can cover that small area for the short time where that route will be shortened. So we have our eyes on it. The community matters to us. We're filling that gap, and we'll continue to work with UTA while we get to a full route. But I'll let Nicole come up and kind of talk through why those changes were necessary.
And then, Mr. Chair, I guess one of the policy questions is in regards to the close to $1 million savings. I would say that that money should go towards 10th North and 6th North to implement those lines a little bit sooner. So.
Okay.
And when we get to that point, I would straw poll that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Fowler.
Actually, my questions are sort of in relation to what Jen just said, so I'm happy to wait until afterwards that we kind of hear about some of those questions from Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Sorry.
So if you don't mind, no. I'm sorry, is there something out there?
Yeah.
Weird.
I apologize for being
No,
late.
no apologies.
Out of
Thank you
breath.
for rushing to be here. I really appreciate it.
Mind reframing the question? I came in late, so I apologize for that.
My questions would be in relation to just that shortage, the change on 9th South route of maybe why that had to occur and when or how long we think it will be temporary. And I know that may be kind of a guesstimate, but I think those would be my questions related to that, and probably the majority of us are questions related to that.
Well, first, let's say that Salt Lake City, UTA, and the customer, this isn't the best ending spot for us to date. So we agree that, this is a temporary solution for us. And how we got to the situation is, as we were planning, and this is new situation for us as a whole, we had some issues with the University of Utah. But really on North Temple, we were looking at a temporary solution there with the RDA, with the city, and how we program that as a hub long term. We were also looking at how we align this going forward, excuse me, in relation to what changes were being done at the university. So it's not where we'd like to end up, but due to timing, starting the service as soon as August, and some of the conditions that were came to light at the last minute, like finding asbestos in the Rocky Mountain Power, what was it, their parking lot. We came to the conclusion that we had to find a location to make sure that we could do the 9 service. Long term, immediately by next year, we need to find another solution on North Temple. The university threw us a little bit, but I think there was also the North Temple spot through us as finding a location in the small amount of time. So I think those are the conditions that put us where we are today. But I think we as UTA need to recognize with the city that this isn't optimal for this line. That's not where we'd want to end up. And we're working with the city and RDA on a study to see where this hub should go, how we develop that, and we've even received grant funds to move forward. So I apologize, my voice. I'm like, but how we move forward to make sure that we get this in place as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you, Nicole. And I appreciate that information a lot. And also, again, thank you for rushing to be here. But I also really appreciate and want to say, kind of follow Jen's comments. You weren't necessarily here for them yet, but of how great it is that this relationship that Salt Lake City has been able to form with UTA in such a different way than what we've heard in years past. And so really kudos to Jen McGrath, kudos to Ken, kudos to the Transportation John and everyone here, and to you. I know that you were really instrumental in kind of forging that relationship because it is a collaborative effort, and I'm glad that we're working together and finding solutions for this on that temporary basis and look forward to furthering this relationship. So thanks to all of you right there.
Your team really helped us with the University of Utah, and so I thank them because we're all happy about this new service and really appreciate all the work they've done to help us get this aligned. So thank you all.
Likewise.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you all. And I had a discussion offline with Jen McGrath and some issues there. I appreciate the compensation piece about the trips to transit. I'd be intrigued to hear more about that specific piece. I have a concern, I guess, about public awareness of this change. Everything we've done so far has been actually the last part of that to North Temple. The ride-along day, everything was about that particular section. And I'm concerned about information getting out and undermining sort of use of that route quickly.
Want to talk about marketing? Either one of us can talk about our marketing plans, but go
Yes.
ahead.
So actually, we just came from a meeting with, we've hired Studio 6 out of Colorado, and they are in town today, tomorrow, and Thursday, and we met with Andrea Packer from UTA that works in Nicole's group, and are forming our marketing plan for that. So getting all of the information out there, bringing together the trips to transit with the new service and the other elements, Hive Pass, Green Bike, all the first last mile solutions. So how we get that messaging out as a comprehensive system is what we're working on as we speak.
I can tell you where we are today. August Change Day for us is huge for UTA, specifically around these routes, but also in addition to what we're doing regional service-wide. So we do have a plan that identifies these routes with Salt Lake City, specifically using some of the admin money that was given to us through this process that will allocate to identify new routes. 9 is a new route, 4 is a new route, and really helping our customers align what that means to their trips. So as the team works through this branding piece, we're also working through a customer kind of experience piece of how we message that. So today, if you go online right now, the new lines are up there on our website. So we've brought you a map. When Laura gets here, she's working on it. I have a map of that so you can kind of see the start and the stop.
Okay.
And they're being updated as we speak online.
Yeah, that's my second question about the number 4 bus. I've had concerns about the 516 and changes there and not knowing any information yet. So the sooner we can get that, I'd be appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So just so you know, it is online. It has been there since our public hearing. But again, we need to market that to the public as you suggest. So.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I think following up Mr. Rogers' statement earlier, I don't disagree with investing in the implementation of the 6th North and 10th North routes. I would like to have a discussion about the Hive Pass or fares in general for these routes. And if there's a way we could, I think we're waiting for the study to come back that we funded last year.
Yeah, I think September timeframe is when we're looking
September?
at completing
Okay.
that.
I'd be intrigued to hear what that says and if we need to look at how we're doing our fare structures internally in the city, because having the routes is one part of it. The second part is financially accessing them for folks. So,
No, I think I appreciate you bringing that up, Councilmember, because I do think that having that data is going to help us a lot. It's, so yes, once we have that study back, we can use it and figure out how best to move forward.
okay, just for that $1 million we've now saved, I don't want to allocate all of it quite yet until we have all that information.
Okay. Councilmember Fowler, and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Sorry, this is, again, a follow-up on the addendum itself, and this is more of a legal question. And I don't want to delay anything, but I don't know if, because this is an addendum and we've had an attachment with the master plan in there, if we need to change that, that route's not coming in the addendum part of it, right? I don't know if Rusty's back there looking at me, but hopefully you understand my question, because this is, a binding document, and it says that it describes that route that isn't all the way there. And I don't want to delay anything at all. I know we need to take action on this sooner rather than later because it's an August deadline. Or if we need to somehow add another addendum saying that I'm not sure what needs to happen or if anything needs to happen.
I have a non-legal opinion since I'm not an attorney. My opinion on that is that we all agree that we want to get to the end of line identified in the map in the current addendum as quickly as we can. And so I'm of the opinion that there's not a lot of risk in including it now with the idea that we're going to get there as fast as we can.
I will say that because we knew we had some operational efficiencies that we would change, that we talked about alignment, not route starts and ends. So the way I read it on UTA's behalf, and I will look to legal, is that there is no beginning, there is no end that we are obligated to. Just for this point, if we had to change an EOL or if things changed due to operation cuts. But I would defer to the attorneys. But from our standpoint, we feel like we have that opportunity without changing the ILA.
No, I think that
Or did.
that raises a really valid point. So I just, as long as everybody's on the same page, I'm okay. I want to move forward with it and be okay with it.
But
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks. Nicole, thanks for bringing a map. Is there another one in addition to the
I will
9th
tell you,
South?
all of the changes in Salt Lake City are on our website at RIDE UTA, and it says August change day.
Oh,
I
okay.
brought that one specifically just because
Thank
there
you.
were some questions around the elimination of the 516 and the actual
Yes.
9.
I will
And-
look for the August change date.
But
'cause-
those, we have a map that's included, and this is what the public's been seeing and what our public hearings are. So that aligns with our service that we're putting out there.
So with the change date and all of the excitement around it, are there any events planned to kick off these new routes?
Well, I don't want to steal the thunder of Julianne and my staff, but I do know that they have about a 3-phase process around, I heard some cool things, but I'm not going to bring them up, but they have a lot of events around specific Salt Lake City service and then how we integrate it throughout. So I would say yes. We
Great.
have phases before, from now to change day, a phase that's directly after, and then ongoing so that people get used to this. But I don't want to do the promotional thunder, but there are some cool things we can tell you offline.
Yeah.
Great. And if the sooner we could get invites to council members, I know we don't have anything on our calendar yet for any of that, but summer fills up.
I just
but I'm
wanted
sure
to
we'd
say that
love
we
to
will
help.
let you know as soon as we can. We will telegraph
Thank
that to
you.
y'all, so you will know.
And sorry that you both have to share a microphone, even though there are 4 up here. That was fun watching you both. Try to figure out who owned the mic and who didn't. So, okay. Other questions or Councilmember Johnston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had one more question that you may have not answered today. It's about 2 more routes through the Poplar Grove neighborhood, the 513 and the 509. I did have a conversation several months back about whether those would be reevaluated as well for the frequency within 9th West. They tend to run concurrently through that section of the west side because they start at different places and different places. Do you know if that's a part of the design review at this point going forward next year? Any sense of that?
Yeah, I would have to get back to you on that
Okay.
one. I'm thinking we looked at it, but again, I'd have to talk to our planners
Okay.
on that one, on those 2 lines specifically.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
But we will.
Questions or comments? So thank you all very much. Is there anything else you want to impart with us before we move on?
Yes, there is. We want to allocate
tell.
that money for 610th North.
So that's exactly what I was going to ask, is since the council is scheduled to vote next Tuesday on this, staff will be preparing the motion sheet. Our understanding is Councilmember Johnston is interested in looking at the Hive Pass and other potential uses, but the full amount could be placed in a holding account pending that information for later
That's
discussion.
what my straw poll was going to be, Ben.
And which is a straw poll that I like, actually.
Yeah.
I think let's hold on to the money and spend it for
Soon
what
as
it
that
was.
comes in,
Yeah,
we'll evaluate it.
spend it on what we meant to spend it on.
Okay, that's what we needed. Thanks.
So glad we're on the same page, you and I.
Well, we are.
You are the same person.
We're jammed
You're the
through,
same
man.
person.
Come
House
on.
divided, can't stand.
Okay, thank you all. So, we are set to take action on this next week.
Correct.
And, per, what Councilmember Rogers and Johnston have talked about, just holding on to that and moving forward.
Can I do a 15-second timeline for
Sure.
the coming year, just that will help with your decision making? So, in the next 2 months or so, we'll have the report for the Fair Pass analysis, and then we're also going to be kicking off and getting rolling on a variety of studies. The Second South Transit Mall / hub, the West Side hub, and then 600 North as well. So by next spring, so by the time we're having the budget discussions for next year, we will have a lot more information about not only the projects, but kind of the order of magnitude and the costs associated with that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Item 6 on our agenda. Now we'll talk about capital improvement program projects. Ben Lutke is staying at the table, and Dan Ripp is going to now join him. And we can go through
My staff report.
what the mayor's recommendations were to us and next steps.
Always. This is the first of 4 briefings on the fiscal year 2020 capital improvement program since the annual budget. There is a public hearing scheduled next Tuesday. The council is scheduled to take action on August 20th. There is a new deadline for adopting project-specific allocations, which is September 1st. I just want to highlight a couple main points. The council adopted 2 years ago an updated resolution with guiding policies for CIP. And one of the key policies was a 3-year spending deadline. And the administration has gone through and reviewed all of the old capital accounts. And over the last 2 years, nearly $2 million has been recaptured and made available for projects. And this is from projects that finished under budget or were never started for various reasons. Some of the significant changes coming to the CIP process include this is the first year with a CIP book. As we discussed during the RDA capital projects, it includes the general fund as well as the capital projects for all of the enterprise funds. We received it on July 2nd, and if there are any specific questions on the CIP book, Mary Beth is here. She and finance led the effort putting that book together, and the administration has invited feedback on the formatting, the content, et cetera. And you may notice that the funding log is shorter than in previous years. The CIP book is envisioned as a single source of information. It doesn't include all the information that was in the funding log last year, but the guiding policies that you adopted 2 years ago provide the specifics for what information you've requested, and I understand the administration is going to work on including those in future CIP books. The administration is also working on the capital facilities plan. This is the 10-year CIP plan. There was a briefing back in January about this. And recently in Budget Amendment number 6 of last fiscal year, the council appropriated all the funding necessary to update the impact fee facilities plan, all 4 sections, the fire, parks, police, and streets. It's still 2 years out, but it's exciting that a bond is going to be paid off, and it will free up $5.5 million that currently go to debt service that will be available for CIP projects. The capital facilities plan, the 10-year CIP plan, if the council elects to set policy goals, that $5.5 million would be one of the main mechanisms to implement your goals over the 10-year plan. There is a summary chart of all of the funding sources. It's also up on the big screen, and it compares funding for CIP from fiscal year 16 to the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget. The council added $289,000 in one-time funding using vacancy savings from the delayed hiring of the 23 new police officers. So this is in addition to what the mayor had recommended. So there's currently $289,000 that does not have a recommendation for use. The total budget is just over $33 million. This is 4.1% more than last year. If you remove the one-time funding, the ongoing funding for CIP has been about flat for 3 years now. The general fund transfer, which is the ongoing, is $21.4 million, which is about 7%, and this is what the council has aimed for. There was an audit that said 8% or 9% would be even better, but I don't think we've ever reached 9% in the last decade or two. The unrestricted funds available to go to any project, these are general fund dollars, the most flexible. You can put them to any project you want. They're just under $8.5 million total, and this is an increase of 6.5%, about $500,000 more than last year. There is a split, you'll notice, in the far left column on the funding log. There is a C for capital or an M for maintenance. The funding log is organized by maintenance projects first and capital projects second. Most of the projects proposed are capital projects, which is $6.5 million, and just under $2 million are maintenance projects. Overall, debt service is 62% of the general fund transfer to CIP. And when you look at all of the ongoing CIP funding, debt service is a little over 40%. As happens each year, the requested funding far exceeds the available funding. Over $52 million is requested, which is 160% of our available funding. In previous years, we have reviewed the general policy questions first and then dived into each of the individual projects. Given the 4 briefings, one today and one next week, it would be helpful if we could get through all of the CIP projects today and next week to gather all of your questions and the areas you'd like to look at funding, so that we have time over the 3-week break to gather feedback and have it ready for you at the August 6th briefing. So if we want to do the general policy questions and then dive into the individual projects, we can do that.
Preferences, questions, comments? Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thanks. At the beginning of the book, where we get a little snapshot of our bonds on page B4, that's the taxable sales tax revenue refunding bond series 2014A. That seems to be our next bond to mature in October of next year. It looks like it was originally just over 26 million. And this is going to provide some capacity or another bonding opportunity in our sales tax, assuming we don't see a decrease in sales tax revenue. Has there been any conversation yet about this bonding potential?
It's always changing. As a matter of fact, Maureen and I were just talking bonding sales tax bonds, refund of sales tax bonds, because the economy is changing. So, as things happen and change, right now, bonding at this very moment is a good option, because what's happening with the economy is it's going up and down, and so bonding rates right now are going down. So it's hard to predict all the way out to October of 2020 of next year, especially when we're in such an influx at this point in time in the economy. We have done, when we talked about the police precinct, we did different scenarios for the council and what $5 million would give you in different scenarios. But it's changing all the time.
Sure.
So, you also can take this $5 million, and just put it directly to CIP projects and not bond as well, right? So this would go back into that CIP pot of money. You can use it for bonding, or you can use it for CIP projects, either way.
Right.
We can go back and do that right now, but that doesn't mean in a year from now.
Well,
that's
I want
gonna be
to, I mean,
different.
we took what was really an expedited timeline with funding our future, but it was still a pretty extensive public process that we went through last year in having a conversation leading up not only to the sales tax, but to putting that $87 million on the ballot through a GO bond. But I think like October of next year isn't that far away. Nope. And I just want to call it to my peers' attention that this is the next bond to mature in our portfolio, and it's not an enormous amount of money relative to some of the other bonds that we've talked about, and that we have on our books right now. But this is a big chunk of change, and we should start thinking about this. And I'm sure whoever the next mayor is will be thinking about this. But the council should have this in our sights.
Yep.
So just
Okay.
2 quick things. I think that the CFP, the Capital Facilities Plan, that the administration is undertaking will probably inform, how that money could most efficiently be used. So that's one thing that will help. I think the other thing is that's helpful to know is that the last time there was a massive contraction in the economy, CIP really provided the city with a mechanism for essentially riding it out without having to lay off large numbers of employees. So capital projects were essentially frozen for a year. And it, while we don't want to plan that flexibility with our CIP budget, it is kind of helpful to think about how the city handled it the last time, since it's probably coming again at some point. So anyway, just those two things.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Councilmember Johnston and then Councilmember Valdemoros.
I want to thank you for the booklet. It's excellent work. Is this electronically available on the website anywhere, or how do we get a hold of this for the public?
Yeah, I believe that it's on posted where our budget book is posted, and if it's not, I will make sure that it is there.
Okay.
The other thing that I wanted to note is that as we were developing this book, we did go through Resolution 29, or I went through Resolution 29 and was like, oh, we're missing this, we're missing this. This is a real work in progress. I mean, I want to thank my staff and Dan and Jen's staff for putting this together. They put it together in a month. So for them to put this together, the initial book in a month, is pretty spectacular. But, I already know that there are certain things that I want to change and want to do, and knew it from the time I printed this book. But I couldn't do it at that point in time. So going forward, we really want to align this with Resolution 29. We really want to make sure that each page has all of the questions that you have going forward. And so even though it's a good start, it's not a complete finished project, but it will be next year. Hopefully we can move closer to that next year.
Just to add on to what Mary Beth said, we're aware, but we're also already moving in that direction. So for example, one of the questions was about, identifying which projects are within an RDA area. And we've added that to the application so that when people fill out the application for this coming year's projects, they'll be able to tick a box, and then that information will be available to us to put into the book. So in addition to us identifying that there are things that are missing, we are putting mechanisms into place to make sure that we are able to gather that information over the course of the next year to be able to get it into the next book. We didn't have that opportunity this time for some of those things, but we're working towards that now and making strides in that direction.
Yep.
Okay. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Councilmember Valdemoros.
And was that the response to why some of these items say requests does not go through CDCIP board for review and recommendation? I mean, or Ben, sorry,
So that gets to policy question number 5, the rescope projects vetted through the advisory board.
Okay.
There are 2 rescoped projects. One is just under $3.5 million proposed to, instead of going to a new downtown park, instead improve Pioneer Park. The other is $127,000 from a project that finished under budget. And these amounts didn't go through the advisory board for them to say if they see other uses for the funds that should be considered. And so the policy question is, does the council have a preference about rescoped projects going through the advisory board to compete against other projects? Because when they don't go through the process with all the other projects, they kind of skip that part and jump to the front of the line. That being said, there are special circumstances with the $3.5 million for a new downtown park or proposed for improvements to Pioneer Park. It's entirely Parks impact fees. And Parks impact fees will start expiring September next year, and so there's no longer time for it to go through the normal CIP process. But that being said, moving forward, the council can say we would prefer rescoped projects to go through the competitive process like every other project. But that's for you to discuss and decide.
And that's our intention going forward, is that those would go back through the process, except in extenuating circumstances like Ben just described, where doing that would cause us to lose those funds.
Okay. We don't want to lose that. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing that,
I don't see it on the website yet, so
okay,
I will send a link whenever it's on there to my folks. Thank you.
I will make sure that it's on the website tomorrow morning.
okay, so as Ben mentioned, this is the first of Four hearings that we're going to be, or work sessions, discussions we're going to be having. I would encourage all of you to just continue, making notes, ideas with your recommendations and wants through the booklet, and then we will be able to take those as we move forward. So,
and if you have any questions on funding shifts or council added projects, or I'm free and available.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you all. The next item is a short one. Item number 8, Council Office Policy Manual, Internal Management of Social Media Accounts and Public Comments. Cindy Liu and Catherine Bramson will be, Catherine's coming down. No.
Looking for Kate? For Kate Braxton. She's right here.
Oh, perfect. Fantastic. Okay, so on the reason that this is on the agenda, for you wondering, there have been a number of social media requests and issues related to both the council Facebook page, our personal Facebook pages, our somewhat public Facebook pages. So we've figured it's best just to talk about this in public and just to move forward. So that's what we're doing. So Cindy Liu, I'll turn the time over to you.
So basically, we want to put the policy that's in draft form in your packets. We'd like to put it into the policy manual as 2 separate sections, A51 and A52 for internal use of social media. And we just have our standard resolution format for updating the policy manual that will have those 2 sections attached. Most of the content in the draft is in practice. The general pieces are in practice. And we do have an existing comment policy, but we're just making it formal to adopt it into the policy manual. And if there's any specific questions, Kate and I are here to answer them as best we can.
Are there questions about the social media policy that were in your staff report? Councilmember Mendenhall.
I just want to thank Kate for helping us understand this, and we've had time to answer my questions in the past. Thank you for helping us navigate this.
Okay, and if there are no comments, if you do have questions, just let either Cindy Liu or Catherine know, and we'll just move forward. All right.
And so this will be on the agenda next week for unfinished business for review of approval.
Yep. Okay. So questions before next week. That's how we'll handle them. So at this point, Councilmember Wharton.
So there was like a Court of Appeals decision that came out, I think, just yesterday.
This one came out today.
Oh, yeah, today.
Correct.
And this doesn't change, that doesn't change anything else.
In fact, it was the case involving our president. It simply affirmed the Southern District of New York case that came out a little over a year ago.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with all the other court decisions in terms of finding the interactive comment space as a public forum based on the way that public official was using the social media account. In that case, it was Twitter. But it's completely consistent with how the law has been developing and simply affirms the advice that we've been giving all of you.
Okay, and would this be retroactive too? Like, would we need to go back and unhide comments or unblock people?
Yes, and so right now, the only individual that's being blocked by the council, unless that's changed, the last time I checked was Aaron Jones. And our advice is going to be, and I can certainly speak more about this in closed session, to, when this policy goes into place, to simply start the clock anew on everything and unblock everybody. If there are any users that then violate the policy, this will give us a good foundation to address those violations.
And that would also count for our accounts that we run, but that are same.
Correct. Again, although this policy is adopted, is not mandatory as to individual council members. It's something that we are recommending you take a look at, and we can certainly advise you further on that application. As you know, it is a fact-specific inquiry, and it can be tricky to make sure you're staying in compliance, I guess, with First Amendment principles.
Okay. So isn't there a pending lawsuit? I mean, that's still pending from
Correct.
Aaron. So what would the effect of this be on the lawsuit? If we implement this, he can still move forward with the lawsuit, right? Because
I'm going to talk about the lawsuit in closed session and not in open meeting.
Okay, thanks. I thought we were in closed session.
Okay, Councilmember Johnston.
Wait for the next session.
May I?
So is this a public or private question that you're going to ask Councilmember? Just kidding.
I'm all public. No, so there's a policy here on a private account that's being used in semi-official capacity, posting as a city council person.
Yes.
Is there language that would be used to post on the page, say a Facebook page or an account?
Going to be this language. And in fact, most of this language is in place now on the city council page. The parts that we have added have to do more with taking down comments, removing them, deleting them, or maybe banning.
So it would be the same language, nothing altered if it was used, say, on my personal page that I'm using for these things. Same language, no alterations that way?
If that's something that makes sense for you, then we would certainly recommend you can use this policy for your page.
Okay.
Your individual. It's actually, yes, your page.
Yeah.
That's not the council page.
Yeah.
Right.
So I can talk offline to Cindy Lou about how that we might mechanize that.
Yeah, we can certainly help you with any technical aspects of that.
Okay, seeing no further comments, I am now, since there are a few questions about the lawsuit and where things are with the lawsuit, my recommendation is that we go into a closed session to talk about strategies. So, strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, and also, let's see. Discussion regarding deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems. So would someone be willing to make those two motions for a closed session? Or just to move my motion?
Also advice of counsel.
And advice of counsel? Okay.
Sure. I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of seeking advice of counsel for updates on pending legislation and deployment of security mechanism. Litigation, not legislation.
Motion by Councilmember Wharton, second by Councilmember Johnston. Councilmember Johnston?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Mendenhall? Rogers? Fowler? Yes. Valdemoros? And me, I'm a yes. We're in closed session.